The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
I'm Tiambe Page from Cultivated, and we're open.
I'm Katie Kirby from Together We Own It, and we're open.
I'm Bob Coffey from Coffee Music, and we are open.
I'm Steve Lowe from 127 Creative.
I'm Andrea Norfolk, president of Shoreline Destinations.
I'm Teresa Bethune with Info Pathways and Freedom Broadband.
Carroll Lutheran Village.
Love's Property Management.
Kelly Fager, Professional Development and Training.
Modern Comfort Systems.
The City of Westminster.
Mutual of Omaha Mortgage.
Carroll Community College.
Love It at Stella's Bridal.
Carroll Occupational Health.
Atlantic Blue.
The Pub Dog Brewing Company.
Dean Robert Camlin, Associates Architect.
I'm Jim Brewer from Maggie's.
Fisher Tire and Auto Service.
Braided Home, in-home care and assistance.
Razor Edges Engraving and Dash Custom Tees.
JKS Home Improvement.
Sterling Quality Water.
Crawford England Insurance.
McDaniel College.
Startup Portal.
And we're open.
And we are open.
And we're open.
And we are open for business.
And we're open.
And we're open.
And we're open.
We are open.
We are open.
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 And we're open. We are the businesses of the Carroll County Chamber of Commerce.
And we want you to know that most of us are still open for business.
In spite of COVID-19.
And we're all struggling to get through.
So before you shop online with Amazon, check us out.
From accountants to vineyards.
And everything in between.
Many of us are offering online services.
And even shipping to your home.
You can find all of us at
www.carrollcountychamber.org.
So be kind,
stay safe,
And shop local.
We're all in this together.
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 Together.
Hello, good morning, and welcome to the Carroll County Chamber of Commerce COVID-19 Economic Update. I'm Zach Fritz of Sage Policy Group, and I'd like to thank you for joining us today. And I'd like to thank our sponsors, Exploration Commons and the Community Media Center, for making this event possible. We have a great program set up for you today, but first I have to get through a few quick housekeeping items. First, this event will be recorded and the video will be distributed at some point after the event. There we go, got my video on. And second, we will be doing a live Q&A after the presentation today. So if you look to the GoToWebinar panel on the side of your screen, you'll see a place to type in questions. Send us any you might have, and we'll try to get through as many as we have time for at the end of the event. And now to get things kicked off, it is my pleasure to turn things over to Mike McMullen, President of the Carroll County Chamber of Commerce. Mike?
Thanks a lot, Zach. Welcome, everybody. Yeah, it's a little different than life has been in the past. Normally, Mr. Lyburn, our commissioners and people have brought Anirban Basu in every year for a nice breakfast meeting, and we get to see him live and get to be entertained. And this year, with things being canceled, we thought, let's do a webinar. Some people might be getting tired of things like Zoom and different types of actual platforms like this, but it's the only way we can do these things right now. So I want to welcome you all here. Thank you all for being here with us. We will turn things over to our sponsors in a couple of minutes, but I wanted to give a couple of announcements here. We have some upcoming events that we'd like you to be a part of. We've definitely shifted our focus from live events to webinars, still trying to keep people together, still trying to build relationships. And our next one will be May 19th from 4 to 6, and it's going to be a new member orientation. We're going to have about 20 people that have joined as of recently on a call, and you can come in and you can hear what kind of a business they have. You can help to give some love and support to them. And local businesses need your love and support big time right now. Never before has there been such an attack on small folks. I mean, you've got Amazon out there, you've got COVID-19, and you've got all the regulations and all the rules keeping so many of these smaller businesses closed while the larger places are open. So that little video that we showed was an attempt to say, hey, even though doors might be closed, a lot of the members that we have, a lot are still open virtually. Call them, shop online, spend your money local. So May 19th will be a fun one to have. May 21st, we have another webinar with Missy Wilcox from MarketWorks, and she's going to be talking about reentry ways to realize success in today's COVID-19 world. We also are doing something called the Carroll Biz Challenge. We've been doing this for years and years and years. It's really our marquee event at the Chamber. It shines a spotlight on local entrepreneurs. We had 47 applicants last year. Our live event this year is going to be August 27th, and we're taking applications for free till the end of May. So if you're at home right now and you're thinking, oh man, what am I going to do? I'm going to watch more Netflix. Turn off Netflix for a while. Go to carrollbizchallenge.com. Fill out an application for a business you would like to have. At some point, small businesses will be back. They are the backbone of our economy. And then last but not least, I wanted to mention Leadership Carroll. It's an amazing program that we do in conjunction with Carroll Community College. This next year, we start in September, and we've got about 2 or 3 spaces left. So if you've ever been interested, would ask you please check that out. And we've got a little bit of space. It could be your space. So that being said, I want to turn things over and thank our sponsors and turn things over to our sponsors. The first person I would like to introduce is Ms. Jen Bishop, Emerging and Digital Technologies Manager of the Carroll County Public Library System and Exploration Commons. And she's going to tell you about an amazing makerspace that we have right here in downtown Westminster. It's going to be realized. It's going to be something amazing for the business community, for our youth, and for the community at large. So, Jen, I'm handing it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Can everybody see the slides okay? Great. Well, Carroll County Public Library is excited to sponsor this event and have the opportunity to introduce Exploration Commons at 50 East, an interactive space coming soon in 2021 to the lower level of the Westminster branch. Exploration Commons at 50 East will offer a tech-focused makerspace, professional teaching kitchen, and a variety of meeting spaces to provide the community with open access to equipment, resources, and knowledge to fulfill their professional, educational, and personal goals. This unique space will support education and workforce development in collaboration with all of our community partners. Exploration Commons will offer a 3,000 square foot tech-focused makerspace. Makerspaces are community-based workshops that allow anyone to design, prototype, and manufacture items using tools that are often inaccessible due to cost or space. The makerspace will provide hands-on access to equipment, resources, and instruction in a collaborative classroom and work environment, including 4 dedicated labs for printing, digital fabrication, augmented and virtual reality, and audio-video production. Exploration Commons will also offer a 1,500 square foot professional teaching kitchen where culinary programs will provide an opportunity to build life skills and create a culture of health and wellness through the joy of cooking. The professional teaching kitchen will support fundamental cooking skills, nutrition, healthy living, and an introduction to new cuisines through access to a commercial kitchen with seating for up to 20 for hands-on instruction or more for demonstrations. Exploration Commons also offer multiple meeting rooms designed for flexibility. This will provide space for the community to use as it sees fit. With these 4 spaces, meetings from 2 to 25 or more can be accommodated in a well-lit, professional environment with access to Wi-Fi, audiovisual equipment, and the ability to arrange furnishings to suit the user's needs. The project is currently out to bid with construction beginning this summer, and we anticipate opening in spring or summer of 2021. You can learn more about the project, view our virtual tours, and follow updates for Exploration Commons at 50 East via our website, explorationcommons.carr.org, and on our dedicated Facebook page. The fundraising campaign for Exploration Commons is currently underway, and we hope that you will support our project and ask that you consider sharing your ideas and expertise with the Carroll County community as part of this new experiential learning space. We look forward to seeing you at Exploration Commons next year. I'll send it back to you, Mike. Thank you.
Jen, thank you so much. So these guys are amazing. If you've never been in the space that they have, it is just incredible. It's huge. It's going to be such a major help to the community, to the youth, to the business community. So please, if you can find your way clear to support them, that would be wonderful. Our next sponsor, I'm going to turn things over to Richard Turner, who's Executive Director of the Community Media Center here in Carroll. And these guys are outstanding. Once again, all the different shows we've put on like this in the past month and a half or so, they've streamed it live like they're doing today on Channel 19, on their website, on their Facebook page, on YouTube. And they are an absolute jewel we have in Carroll, an amazing partner of the Chamber. So Richard, I'm going to turn it over to you for a minute.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks to the Chamber of Commerce under Mike's leadership and the Chamber's Board of Directors. We've experienced great value from this business network and our membership. And also thanks to Anirban Basu for his insight and analysis. It's really become part of the rites of spring for me, getting the insight, getting an idea of what to anticipate in terms of what's happening with our economy. And this couldn't be a more critical time to hear those kinds of insights. Without a thriving business sector and economy, the CMC would not exist. As a nonprofit, we sincerely appreciate the community support in terms of our sponsorships, of our production and programming, and we look forward to our fall season. We hope sports will be in a full reboot, and our Central Maryland Sports Network, our CM Sportsnet, will be up and covering all of our local sports. Mike encourages you to shop local and I encourage you to watch local by heading to our website at carrollmediacenter.org and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks a lot, Mike.
Thank you, Richard. All right, so without further ado, we're going to turn things over to the man of the hour. I first met Anirban when I worked for Pulte Homes 30 years. I don't know how many years ago it was many years ago, and he hasn't aged a day. I've got a brief little bio I want to just read to you here so you can understand just how impactful this guy is. He's smart, he's brilliant, and he's funny. He takes a topic like this that would normally put folks to sleep, the economy, but he makes it fun. And even in this tough time, he promised me only good news today. So I think that's exciting. No, I just tossed that in. All right, Anirban is chairman and CEO of Sage Policy Group, an economic and policy consulting firm in Baltimore. He serves as the chief economist to Associated Builders and Contractors and is chief economic advisor to the Construction Financial Management Association. He's been named, the Baltimore Business Journal named him one of the region's 20 most powerful business leaders in 2010. And today with us, he's the #1 business leader in 2020. He's lived in Baltimore for 28 years with his wife and 2 girls. And I'm just so happy and delighted that he said yes, that he could do this. So Anirban, they're all yours.
Righto, I hope you can hear me. This is Anirban Basu. I'd really love to be with you. Usually I speak in Westminster this time of year, but obviously circumstances have changed. We're going to talk about the economic implications of that. I want to thank, of course, the Carroll County Chamber of Commerce and Mike McMullen in particular for creating this venue and supporting us. Of course, the Community Media Center, one of our sponsors, and very much the Carroll County Public Library. Very excited by Exploration Commons at 50 East. That's something I look forward to. I'm telling you, I'm looking forward to 2021. 2020, I'm not so sure. But 2021, I think, is going to be a much better year for us. And one of the reasons for that is that Makerspace and the other resources at Exploration Commons. So another thing that reminds us how great Carroll County is and will be. So I've entitled today's presentation, Return of the Economist. It is a Lord of the Rings themed presentation. That you will see that theming throughout the presentation. Lots of ways to start a webinar. We, I suppose, could recite a prayer, or the Pledge of Allegiance, even sing the national anthem. I want to start out with something else. I'm going to, start out with the ring verse. In the ring verse in the Lord of the Rings, it says that there are 9 rings for the kingdom of men, 7 rings for the dwarves, 3 for the elves, 1 for the Dark Lord. And you're going to see that organizational framework throughout the presentation, 9731. I'm first going to give you 9 reasons for hope in the kingdom of men and women, and then you'll see the rest of that numeric theming throughout the presentation. The first part of this presentation is the good news part of the presentation. This is the part that should make you happy, because this relates to the way things were before they became what they are. This is the economy we want to get back to. Now, as I mentioned in the Lord of the Rings, there's a Dark Lord. The Dark Lord has been busy. This is global cumulative confirmed cases as of May 11th. globally. We've helped, flatten the curve globally. You can see that, but we're still very much in the midst of this crisis. And one of the things we're going to talk about today is when the recovery begins in earnest, the economic recovery. And we're going to speculate upon that. But obviously, this is relevant from an economic perspective, because even though there's talk about parts of the Chinese economy opening back up, German soccer coming back to life, Korean baseball, Disney in Shanghai, fact of the matter is, we're still dealing with this COVID-19 crisis. We don't have good therapies. We don't have good vaccines. And, well, we can talk about testing later. There's been some chatter about the notion that the virus does not survive well in warmer weather. And that seems to be true to a certain extent. The virus, for instance, doesn't like certain levels of humidity. But, you look here, whether nations close to the equator or not, this thing is spread globally. So as I say, the Dark Lord has been at work. If you look at the United States here, you can see the hotspots. And even though this is a static map, and again, this is through May 11th, even though this is a static map, you can see that, or feel that the virus is creeping towards the heartland, into the heartland, obviously deeply affecting Southeast Michigan and the Chicago area. But some areas more advanced than others. Obviously, New York emerges an early epicenter, Seattle even before that. So here we are. And Maryland now is in the midst of this as well. And I want to talk about the economy today, but please do not think that I am not sensitive to what's happened in the state's nursing homes and just generally speaking, how much we have lost and we cannot recover, even as the economy begins to recover. And we'll talk more about that economic recovery. So here is that ring verse: 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the dark lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie, 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness find them. So, okay, so fine. So let's talk about 9 reasons for hope. Number 1, there was plenty of job growth on Middle Earth, or America. So for 113 consecutive months, we added jobs in America without interruption. Whether it was Houston that was being flooded or presidential elections or whatever was taking place in the news cycle, for 113 consecutive months, we added jobs in America. And over that 113-month period, we added 22 million jobs in America, 22 million. We drove unemployment down to 3.5%. And 3.5% unemployment is a 50-year low. You'd have to go back to December of 1969 to have found unemployment as low as it had been in America pre-crisis. And just to give you a sense of how long ago that was, the Orioles were good back then. So that just gives you some sense of how long ago that was. Now, that winning streak ended with February of 2020. A lot going on this graph. But what we've done is we've indexed each of the months of job growth back to April of 2002 to the left, that left axis. But then March and April of 2020, the last 2 months of data, are indexed to the right. Why did we do that? Because in April, we lost 20.5 million jobs. And so I needed a different axis. And you probably heard that over the last 7 weeks for which we have data, 33.5 million Americans have filed for initial unemployment, for unemployment insurance. So have we wiped out all the job gains from the previous recovery? Oh, yes, we have, and then some. But again, this is the good news part of the presentation. I'll get to the bad news in a second. The data are lagging reality. So if you ask me, Anirban, in Maryland, our great state, how many jobs did we add over the past year for which we have data? And you think, well, we've lost a ton of jobs, right? I mean, the national rate of unemployment, we'll talk about this, is probably close to 20% right now. But according to the most recent data, and this chart pertains to the period March of 2019 to March of 2020, Maryland, according to the data, added 6,500 jobs. Now, what's going on here? We know that the crisis begins in March. You say, no, Anirban, it doesn't begin in March. It began in 2019 because it's called COVID-19 for a reason. We discovered the virus in 2019. Here's what I mean by saying that the crisis is about 2 months and 4 days old. It really starts from an American perspective on March 9th. That's the day the stock market noticed that there was this emerging pandemic. Until that time, the Dow Jones Industrial Average held up pretty well. But on March 9th, the Dow Jones falls more than 2,000 points. And at that time, that was a record for a single day point loss in Dow Jones history. We then set another record on March 12th. We set another record on March 16th. It's a bad week. So in March, a lot of damage was being done to the economy. Basketball fans will note that it wasn't until March 11th that the Utah Jazz are ushered away from the basketball court as their all-star center, Rudy Gobert, is diagnosed with COVID-19. Just a few days later, a fellow all-star, Donovan Mitchell, the Utah Jazz, a very good team, is also diagnosed. So that's 2 months ago, roughly. And a lot of damage was done in March. But the reference week, the so-called reference week, when the employment data were collected in March by the government agency that does this, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that week was early in March. So it captured the period of March that was relatively unaffected. Now, true enough, you can see here that a category called leisure and hospitality lost jobs between March of 2019 and March of 2020. That's your restaurants and your hotels. So social distancing had begun to affect certain parts of the economy. But the overall economy through early March holds up. And you can see that reflected in these data. They don't look awful. Again, the data are lagging reality. This is percentage job growth for the 25 largest metropolitan areas in our country from March of 2019 to March of 2020, just a year slice. And so if you ask me, Anirban, what happened in the Washington metropolitan area between March 2019 and March of 2020, the last year for which we have regional economic data? The number of jobs grew 0.9%. Actually, that didn't happen. But again, what we're really comparing here is early March of 2019 to early March of 2020, when the economy was still, much of it was still holding up. Baltimore Metro, Carroll County is defined as being part of the Baltimore metropolitan area. Employment did not change over that 1 year period. We had just as many jobs in March of 2020 in the Baltimore region as in March of 2019. Again, that's not true. If we were comparing late March of 2019 to late March of 2020, you'd see very different statistics. But again, that's why I said this is the good news part of the presentation. I'm getting to show you data that are not awful. So they're going to get awful, like on this chart. So because we added jobs for 113 consecutive months, unemployment is routed in America. Here I'm showing you three rates of unemployment: men in blue, women in green, overall in red. Well, it was great until it wasn't. Now, you probably heard that the data came out for April. And in April, the unemployment rate for the overall economy was 14.7%. Okay. But it's worse than that, because there was a glitch in the survey. One of the questions being asked, the people responding to the survey, was a bit confusing. And so based on that, there is the notion out there, and if you go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, you might see some discussion about this, but that the unemployment rate for April was actually closer to 20%, not the reported 14.7%. Now, during the previous economic downturn, the downturn of the Great Recession, actually, men were hit harder than women. Don't get me wrong, unemployment rose significantly among both genders. But during the Great Recession, because men are more likely to work in industries like construction and manufacturing. Construction and manufacturing are absolutely routed during the previous downturn. Construction, for instance, lost 2.3 million jobs nationally. So male unemployment rises faster. Women tend to be more engaged in industries like healthcare and education, and those sectors remain more stable during that downturn. But this time is different. You can't probably see it on this chart, but female unemployment right now is well above the national average. Again, the official unemployment rate for April is 14.7%, but the unemployment rate for women is above 16%. Why? Because women are more likely to work in industries like restaurants, at daycare centers, in retail, in hotels. And of course, many women are on the front lines of delivering healthcare. And they, therefore, in many cases, have been at greater relative risk. An easy majority of American nurses are women. So this time around, at least in the early phases of this downturn, women have been hit harder than men from an unemployment perspective. Well, I mean, every cycle is different. This one is too, and we're going to talk about a lot of those differences as we go through this material. Again, that stroll through or down memory lane, unemployment rates in March 2020 for the largest metropolitan areas in the country. Look, here, this is important. I know things are tough in Carroll County. I know things are tough throughout this country. But Washington and Baltimore, at least during the early phase of the downturn, held up better than most regions. We have a lot of institutional employment, a lot of federal agency employment, a big public sector generally, major health centers, University of Maryland, Johns Hopkins, and so on and so forth. And so actually the regional unemployment rate as of March for Baltimore was 3.5%. and in Washington Metro 3.3%. I mean, it's worse elsewhere. But, even these unemployment rates here, even though pushed slightly higher by COVID-19 as of March 2020, are quite low. I mean, that's where we had been. This is March 2020 unemployment for the 24 major jurisdictions of our great state. It is the greatest state in the country, parenthetically. Look at Carroll County here, 2.8%. And that's where we want to get back to, obviously. And we're going to talk about how long it's going to take probably to get back there. It's going to take a long time, as it turns out, but 2.8%. When you've got a circumstance which Caroline County, if you're familiar with Denton or Federalsburg, those kinds of communities on the Eastern Shore, when Caroline County's unemployment rate is 3.5%, that is amazing. And that's where we were, as this crisis was starting. If you graph Carroll County's unemployment rate over time, and this is the progress we made since the Great Recession. We went from roughly 8% unemployment during the worst of it, during the Great Recession or its immediate aftermath, to 2.8% by March 2020. That's, so much progress has been undone. What is Carroll County's unemployment rate today? Well, your guess is as good as mine, but a good guess would be in the range of 17, 18% as of right now, based on Carroll County's relationship to the nation and the notion that the national rate of unemployment is probably around 20% right now. So, but again, where did we come from? So we had more people working, fewer people unemployed, and among businesses, whether in Carroll County or elsewhere, I mean, when business owners are looking at a community with a 2.8% rate of unemployment, what's the issue there? The issue there is if you're a growing business, then where do I find the workforce to satisfy the demand? That was the complaint of many chamber members. That was, that across the country, that's been the complaint. Can't find workers. Well, that's a nice problem to have in some sense. The problem we have now, so much rampant unemployment, that's worse. But when you've got a growing economy, when you've got entrepreneurs driving American commerce forward, and when you've got a low rate of unemployment, guess what happens? You get an upward push in wage levels. This is growth in wages and salaries as measured by the U.S. Employment Cost Index. You look at the chart here, how much progress we're making pre-crisis. Various companies increasing their minimum wages, whether Walmart or many, many others. Actually, Mike mentioned Amazon. I'm not sure how fond Mike is of Amazon. Buy local, I agree with that. Buy local. Buy local, support Carroll County business. We love Carroll County business. Small business is the backbone of this economy and of this country. So support small business. That's who we are. We're entrepreneurs. We're a nation of entrepreneurs. We're a nation of risk takers. So support small business, support chamber members. But here's where we were. So we had more people working, more people earning more money on the job, and so people were shopping, which is good for small business in many cases. They're putting stuff in the baggins. This is U.S. retail sales. Now, you see the dip during the Great Recession. You see the climb out of that and then some. And then in March, retail sales plummet. And as I say, it's going to get worse, obviously, because, again, only part of March was affected by this. I would argue the period from March 9th onward, by and large. I mean, we can quibble about that. But certainly after March 9th, people became much more aware that we were in the midst of something different. And then also, there was a lot of purchasing late in the month as people were buying Lysol and other products and trying to find hand sanitizer, all those kinds of things. And that actually pushed up retail sales. So a lot of this reflects the loss of sales at auto dealerships and so on and so forth. And it's going to get worse in April, obviously, because the entire month of April was impacted. And we don't yet have the April retail sales data. But again, I want to stay positive, if I can, for this part of the presentation. That was the dynamic we had. American commerce was at work. People working, people shopping. And here's the miracle right here. Here's how good it was. So, much of my last 2 years as an economist has been spent unlearning economics. Here's what I mean. So I have been taught in school, and many of you have been taught in school, that when unemployment falls, inflation goes up. It's called the Phillips curve. And we had a 50-year low in unemployment. So if you didn't know anything else, you say, 50-year low in unemployment, we must have lots of inflation. Nope. This is inflation as measured by the core CPI, the core consumer price index. We've graphed it for you back to April of 2000. But for years, inflation in this country has run at around 1.5% to 2.5% for years. Okay? Well, the Federal Reserve's target is 2%. So it's been perfect. In fact, even as we're moving toward that 50-year low in unemployment last year, the Federal Reserve, you might remember, cut interest rates 3 times last year. Not once, not twice, but thrice. The so-called mid-cycle adjustment turned out to be a late-cycle adjustment. So inflation was not a problem. And we had low unemployment. That's the best you can hope for. Some of us lived through the presidency of Jimmy Carter. Fantastic gentleman. Fantastic human being. But he also presided over a period of double-digit unemployment and double-digit inflation. The so-called misery index was over 20%. Low inflation, low unemployment, a very low misery index. Now, what's happening today? We've got some deflationary pressures hitting the economy. Prices are falling. You see what's happened to oil prices, for instance, but many other oil prices, because demand in the economy is weaker. And so you can see the last reading here for the consumer price index came way down. And we're going to see more of that. There's going to be a lot of deflationary pressures, a lot of merchandise on sale, so on and so forth, until demand returns to some semblance of normalcy. But with those low inflation rates came low interest rates. Now, we economists make the mistake of talking about low interest rates as purely benevolent. That's not true. If you're a retiree, if you're trying to save for retirement, if you are running the finances of a life insurance company or a pension fund, low interest rates make it more difficult for you to generate income. And that's a challenge. So low interest rates are not a pure positive. But if you're a borrower, if you're trying to expand your business, if you're trying to purchase a home, if you're trying to purchase an automobile, it's a very fine thing, isn't it? Low interest rates. Now, here I'm showing you the yield on the 10-year Treasury. This is an interest rate that gets all the attention. You might ask the question, why does it get all of the attention? I mean, like the popular kids in high school, why all the attention? This is the most liquid bond in the world. So what does that mean? So, there's always a news cycle. So you might remember when we came into the year, there was a skirmish with the Iranians. And in fact, on January 8th, the Iranians retaliated. And so at that time, there was some uncertainty about whether or not this was going to lead to a full-scale war in the Middle East and so on and so forth. And so if you're an investor, say, looking at your portfolio, you say, okay, you know what? I've got some risk in my portfolio. I'm going to de-risk my portfolio. I'm going to sell some of my riskier assets, and I'm going to buy a safer asset. I'm going to go into the 10-year Treasury. Now, why the 10-year Treasury? Well, it's the most liquid bond in the world. What does that mean? That means that when I go to buy 10-year Treasuries, I know I'll be able to buy them because somebody's always selling them. It is the most liquid bond in the world. January 8th comes and goes. There is no war. Some American soldiers are hurt, and we're very sorry about that, of course. But at least there's no full-scale war that breaks out. And so now I want to go back to the riskier part of my portfolio. So I'll now sell those 10-year Treasuries, that safe asset. And how do I know that I can do that? Well, it's the most liquid bond in the world. So those people buying the 10-year Treasury. That's why it gets all the attention. As I'm speaking to you right now, the 10-year Treasury is yielding 0.648%. That's a 2-second to the second update, 0.648%, and that's low. And so what does that tell us? Well, it's great to have low interest rates at some level, but it also tells us that a lot of investors are scared and just sitting in these safe assets, not so much worried about the yield on that asset, how much interest they're getting, just they want to preserve their capital, and it's part of the fear factor. But again, if the goal is to try to perpetuate a debt-driven expansion cycle, low interest rates are helpful for that. And so we had lots of job creation. We had low interest rates. Guess what people want when interest rates are low and they've got a good job? Probably, or maybe a home. And the millennials are coming of age. The first-time home buyer is back. If you've been speaking to realtors anytime in the last few months, they would have told you, at least pre-crisis, they would have said, look, I got lots of people looking at homes. A lot of people are interested in homes, including here in Carroll County. I got nothing to show them. The inventory of unsold homes is low. That's especially true in Carroll County, where it's been running at around 2 months supply. Normally, equilibrium would be about 6 months supply of homes available for sale. We got 2 months in Carroll County, pre-crisis. So what happens when you got a lot of buyers and supply of homes is low, available homes, home prices rise. So what do we have so far? More people working, more people earning more money on the job, their property values rising, assuming, of course, their own property. That drives construction, right? Because home builders see unmet demand out there. So my goodness, people are looking at homes. There's not much for them to buy. Let me meet that unmet demand. So toward the end of last year and into 2020, residential building permits surged. So before you build, you have to get permission from government to build as a home builder. And a lot of people were getting permission late last year because the single-family home market was coming back to life, including in the form of construction or prospective construction. Now that's been shut down. You can see the last couple of readings are worse and home builders are uncertain. I mean, coming into the crisis, nationally, home builder confidence was at a 20-year high. So obviously it's no longer a 20-year high. But and then finally, as part of this momentum story, the stock market itself. So here we at Sage have indexed for you the Dow Jones Industrial Average to the right and the NASDAQ and the S&P to the left. You remember that joke we all used to tell during the Great Recession? You remember that joke? My 201k is now a 401k. Do you remember? Sorry, I did it backwards. My 401k is now a 201k was a joke. My 401k is now a 201k. By the way, no one ever laughed at that joke. But then your 201k became an 801k. You know, we had Dow Jones over 29,000, NASDAQ trading at 9,800 in late February. I mean, and actually the stock market's held up pretty well. I entitled this slide, but it goes to Elvin, because that pays homage to the fact that there's lots of elves in Lord of the Rings. But also to fully understand the title of the slide, one would have to harken back to a movie that came out in 1984 called This is Spinal Tap. And if you understand that reference, this becomes hilarious. But if you don't, that's fine. The point is, more people working, more people earning more money on the job, seeing their property values rise, their stock portfolios rise. That's where we were. That's how we entered 2020. That stroll down memory lane. But I have to say, even as the economy was expanding, there were some vulnerabilities that were emerging. And we actually talked about that when I came to Westminster in 2019. But by 2020, those vulnerabilities had become even more serious. And so let's talk about that. So number one thing, and so I've done the 9, here's the 7. So number one thing, not all segments of the economy were participating fully in the expansion. I can tell you there's a local farming community that's found it quite difficult with low wheat prices, corn prices, soybean prices, effective trade wars, so on and so forth. Another sector beyond agriculture that has been weak in recent years is manufacturing. Obviously, manufacturing is a big deal in Carroll County, lots of mid-sized manufacturers in Carroll County, many of which have been expanding recently. Great stories coming out of that segment of Carroll County's economy. Lots of demand for industrial space pre-crisis. So this is the Institute of Supply Management's Purchasing Managers Index. You see that 50-yard line running west-east across that slide. Any reading below 50 means that manufacturing in America is in recession. Now, it was in 2001, of course, the broader economy was in recession. It was in 2008, 2009, of course, the broader economy was in recession. And it was for 5 months late last year. Trade war with China. Strong US dollar, which among other things frustrates export growth. The issues at Boeing. The fact that the US auto sector peaked for the cycle at around 2016. So all of these things pressed upon manufacturing. And so for 5 months late last year, US manufacturing is in recession. So there was some weakness coming into the year. But late last year, what do we get? We get that first phase trade deal with China. We get ratification of the USMCA, the US-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. We see Boris Johnson's resounding victory in the United Kingdom. So that gave us more certainty regarding Brexit. When was the last time you talked about Brexit? You've been talking about Boris Johnson, perhaps, but not Brexit. And so all of a sudden, U.S. manufacturing actually popped out of recession early this year. So all that uncertainty surrounding the global supply chain abated, and we get a reading of 50.9 on this index in January, out of recession, above 50. But by February, the supply chain effects coming out of China and elsewhere began to impact U.S. manufacturing. And then as the global economy falls into its own recession, you can see the latest reading here at 41.5, manufacturing now in quite a deep recession once again. But our greatest source of vulnerability is this: indebtedness. The indebtedness that we had accumulated over the course of this expansion. Because it really was a debt-fueled expansion. And that shouldn't surprise you. Interest rates were low throughout the cycle. They were kept low on purpose to try to accelerate our recovery from that Great Recession. But these data come from the Congressional Budget Office. Too much data on here by half. Let me walk you through this. So the Congressional Budget Office had a baseline estimate for the federal budget deficit as of March of 2020. Those are these light purple or pink colored bars here. And so coming into this period, the forecast had been that for fiscal year 2020, federal fiscal year 2020, the federal budget deficit would be around $1 trillion, and something similar to that in 2021. But we now have updates that came forward in April of 2020 that were submitted in 2020. So the federal budget deficit for the current fiscal year 2020, is now projected at $3.7 trillion. And for next year, 2021, $2.1 trillion. And the deficits could get larger, of course, because Congress right now is talking about another $3 trillion stimulus package. Now, you might like that idea or you may not. I certainly like part of it, which is assistance to state and local governments, because state and local governments have to balance their budgets each year. And if we start to see a lot of loss of public sector workers, that's going to exacerbate the crisis. But set that aside for now, this is the situation we came into the crisis with, this massive federal government indebtedness. The national debt was around $23.5 trillion coming into the crisis. And one could make the argument that America's been growing for some of the wrong reasons. Here's what I mean. Let's do some simple math. Huh? So last year, America's economy grows 2.3% in real, meaning inflation-adjusted terms. I didn't mention it earlier, but there's another measure of inflation that's actually preferred by the Federal Reserve. It's called the core PCE deflator. PCE stands for personal consumption expenditures. And that measure of inflation suggests that inflation over the past year has been running at around 1.6 or 1.0%. So let's go with that. So if you add that 1.6 or 1.0% to the 2.3%, that real economic growth, in nominal terms, America's economy grows 4% last year. Let's do some more math. Last year, the federal budget deficit, last calendar year, was $1.02 trillion. In 2019, last year, we, the American people, produced $21.7 trillion in economic output. If you do the math on that, the federal budget deficit as a percentage of GDP last year was 4.6%. Now, you take away that 4.6% federal government deficit spending, there is no economic growth in America. 4.6% is greater than 4.0%. Now, at least that's statistically the result. And, you know, the forecast had been coming into the crisis that would have large deficits as far as the eye could see. Again, this comes from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. The dark blue-colored bars here represent the forecast for the federal budget deficit as a percentage of American output. And as far as the eye can see, we're looking at roughly 5% annual deficits as a percent of GDP. That's massive. But now, of course, we've had COVID-19. So this is an aspect of our vulnerability as a people, the national debt. But there's more, because households have never been so indebted. This is consumer debt. So here we're showing you various flavors of indebtedness. In orange is mortgage debt, blue is credit cards, red is student loans. Look at that student loan segment there. I mean, these data go back to 2003. Look at how much student loan debt has climbed. That's one of the reasons we have so much stress, right, as a people. Not only have 1/5 of Marylanders, you know, filed for unemployment insurance over the course of this crisis, but, you know, people live paycheck to paycheck, and one of the reasons for that is that, you know, they take on a lot of debt. I'm not criticizing anybody. It's the way we live. But when people lose jobs, all of a sudden that credit card bill comes, and the auto loan bill comes, the student loan bill comes, and my goodness, that's stressful. You know that an incredible fraction of folks couldn't pay their rent in early April. Some people caught up, by the way. They got their check from the government, that $1,200, for instance, and they were able to make up rent in late April. But we know a lot of folks are now, again, missing their rent in early May, and that's going to continue. So this is a source of vulnerability, that indebtedness. Corporate debt has never been so great. You say, about how can corporate debt be so great? I mean, didn't we cut corporate tax in late 2017? We did. And didn't you talk about a booming stock market? Underlying that must have been corporate earnings growth. True. And I did mention the booming stock market. But this is what happens when you buy back your shares every year. I'm exaggerating with that. But when you buy back your shares, you issue debt to buy back the shares, debt goes up, equity goes down. And this also happens when you buy your leading competitor. So we've had a lot of mergers and acquisitions during this cycle. The peak year for mergers and acquisitions in this cycle was 2017, as it turns out. The peak year for stock repurchases was 2018. But a lot of that is financed with debt. So another source of vulnerability. So within days of this crisis breaking out, what happened? Boeing raised its hand and said, what? We need $60 billion, government. We have only one competitor, but we're not making it. We've got the 737 MAX problem. We have this issue coming into the crisis. We're vulnerable. So, you know, this is not where the story ends. I want to talk about productivity now. Why would you talk about productivity, Anirban? Because ultimately, it's productivity growth that defines how rapidly our living standards increase as a people. So productivity is often measured as output per hour worked. So when I was growing up, and Mike McMullen and I spent some time in Illinois. I grew up in Kankakee County, Illinois. He's a fancy pants and was in Chicago, but set that aside. I heard from economists and others, look, Anirban, America's rate of growth per year is 3% on average in real terms. We grow 3% a year in real terms on average. Now, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, sometimes Jimmy Carter's president, sometimes it's Ronald Reagan, sometimes it's Bill Clinton, but it's 3% a year on average. You ask economists like myself today how fast the U.S. economy will grow under normal circumstances, let's say post-COVID-19, I'm going to say 2%. Why? Well, look at the third bullet here. U.S. productivity has risen at an average rate of 1.3% since 2007, compared with an average of 2.1% since the end of World War II. So economic growth long-term is basically two things added together: labor force productivity growth plus labor force growth. So labor force is not growing that rapidly because immigration policy has shifted, but also baby boomers are retiring in large numbers. Productivity is not growing rapidly. Now you can fuel economic growth in the short term by what mechanism? Debt. You take out a lot of debt now. You raise your perceived living standards today by borrowing from the future, but at some point in the future, you're going to have to start paying it back. So if we really want to be the nation that we want to be going forward, enjoy those robust rates of growth, we need to bolster productivity. How do you do that? Better infrastructure, more investment by businesses, which means you have to have more confident businesses, better training, better education, all kinds of stuff, and maybe even more motivation as a society. But in any case, the point is, you see these results and they're not very positive. It's not a source of vulnerability. And by the way, even though we've been talking about COVID-19 for seemingly years, but really months, there are other situations or circumstances out there that are worrisome, right? There's still a North Korea. There's still a Middle East. There's still a France. That's a joke. Or there is still France, but I don't think it's a big problem. Anyway, the point is this. Those sources of uncertainty haven't gone away. This is the Global Economic Policy Uncertainty Index. Now, interestingly, late last year, uncertainty in the world is actually declining. Why is that? Well, we get that first phase trade deal with China. We get ratification of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. We get Boris Johnson's resounding victory in the United Kingdom. I'm not saying I'm a Boris Johnson fan or not. That's not the issue. The issue is that with that victory, we don't have to worry so much about Brexit, what it ultimately looks like, or Britain's exit from the European Union. So actually, uncertainty abated toward the end of last year. You can see that on the slide. But now with COVID-19, with so much anger in the world, with each nation pursuing its own path to recovery, with the global supply chain fragmenting, uncertainty is on the rise again. Now, this is another factor that we're not thinking about right now, but it will weigh on the economy once recovery begins in earnest. And then finally, we come into this period, the last element of that vulnerability, with a stock market that I won't say is priced to perfection, but it was high. And what goes up, that 201k going to an 801k, what goes up can come down. What goes up a lot can come down a lot. This is the Shiller price earnings ratio, graph back to 1980. What I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to juxtapose for you the prices of shares on the S&P 500 vis-a-vis their underlying corporate earnings. And pre-crisis, now the price earnings ratio is compressed recently, but pre-crisis, you'd have to have gone back to March of 2000, just before the dot-com bust, to find a stock market so priced to perfection. Don't get me wrong. The previous decade was a phenomenal one for America. It really was. But we went that entire decade without a recession. That had never happened in American history before. Something strange happened. Our share of global output actually rose during the previous decade. I mean, in previous decades, our share of global output has been in decline. And some of that was engineered by whom? By us. It's the Americans who fashioned the Marshall Plan to help rebuild Europe after World War II. It's the Americans who spent their own treasure to help rebuild the Japanese economy post-World War II, trying to turn our sworn enemies into our future trading partners, and boy, did it work. Germany today is the fourth largest economy in the world. Japan is third. But something happened in the last decade that was different. America's share of global output actually rose from 23% at the beginning of the decade to 25% at the end. Look, we Americans have issues. Our broken politics, our national debt, our infrastructure issues. But we are less than 5% of the world's population. We're responsible for a quarter of its output. We're doing something right. And again, at the heart of this is small business. And it's entrepreneurship, it's innovation, it's productivity, it's risk-taking. That's why you support the Carroll County Chamber, because you support small business. Not to say that big business is not important, of course it is. I mean, there's a lot of innovation coming out of companies like Tesla and many others. And my goodness, when you think about companies like Regeneron, Pfizer, Merck, Gilead Sciences, Moderna, all these pharmaceutical or life sciences companies that are trying to come up with therapies and vaccines, boy, they're pretty important. And they're big businesses. But in any case, this was really quite remarkable performance, our share of global GDP rising. But does that performance justify this performance? This is stock market returns by country or region 2010 to 2019. So America's stock market return last decade, 256%. Now, a decade is 10 years. Take 256 divided by 10. You get roughly, back of the envelope, annual rate of return. That's massive. So the economy was good. Was it that good? Look at emerging markets here, 49%. Emerging markets in general grow faster economically than the United States, but you wouldn't know that from the stock market return. India, which took a bad economic year pre-COVID-19, would grow 6% in real terms, 46%. So this was another source of vulnerability coming to the crisis, the fact that the stock market was so lofty. Interestingly, there was some naivete expressed by the economics community coming into the crisis. I mean, you would have heard in late February and into early March, some economists suggesting, not me, by the way, but some economists suggesting that we might be able to avoid recession. That the momentum of the economy was strong enough that it could carry us through. Nonsense. That fundamentally misunderstood the nature of this crisis. This COVID-19 episode is just different economically. I'm going to point out 3 things that make it different. So I've done the 9, I've done the 7, here's the 3. There have been efforts to try to compare this to previous periods. I've heard economists compare this to 08, 09, the Great Recession. I've heard economists compare this to 9/11. I was actually on a webinar with another economist, a very prominent economist, last week, who suggested that we could compare this to Katrina, what happened in New Orleans back, I believe, was in 2005. Nonsense. This is different. Number one, it's a supply shock. In 2008, 2009 was a demand shock. What happened? The money disappeared. It disappeared from the stock market, disappeared from the banking system, credit tightened up, people couldn't get loans. And so what did we do? We had the Troubled Assets Relief Program to recapitalize the banks. We had the quantitative easing where the Federal Reserve injected trillions of dollars of liquidity into financial systems. We put air back in the balloon. We put money back in the economy. And that fashioned or fomented the lengthiest economic expansion in American history. This is different. This is supply shock. This is quarantines, travel bans and restrictions, closure of public places. Can't see the Orioles. This is factory closures and supply chain interruptions. Now, true enough, because people can't go to work, that triggers unemployment and a follow-on demand shock because people are losing income and confidence, so on and so forth. But ultimately, it's a supply shock. So this is different, just very different from earlier episodes. And it's such a massive supply shock. Every industry is affected. And the global economy was already fragile coming into this period. I got too much data on here by half, too much information. But let me pick off that second bullet here. Already trade wars had pushed global growth in 2019 to its lowest rate since the 0.7% contraction in 2009. The global economy was already vulnerable. Now, because we got that first phase trade deal with China, because trade tensions were abating, because we got ratification of the USMCA, the US-Mexico-Canada Trade Agreement, and for some other reasons, Brexit, so on and so forth, the International Monetary Fund was predicting coming into the year that the global economy will grow 3.3% this year, which would have been better than last year's 2.9% performance, which was quite pathetic. But the current forecast now is that the global economy will shrink for the year by 3%. And of course, it could be worse. Forecasts are subject to change. American economists are finally coming to terms with how devastating this is. The second quarter of this year, we're in the second quarter right now. We're right in the middle of the second quarter, right? Mid-May. This will be the worst quarter of our economic lives. The economists at Morgan Stanley are predicting roughly a 38% decline in GDP on an annualized basis for the current quarter. JP Morgan, economists 40%. That sounds about right. By comparison, during the worst quarter of the Great Recession in late 2008, the economy shrank 8.4%. This is different. It's bigger. And, some of you may have entered in this debate whether or not this is a recession or a depression, but in some sense, it is a depression. Because a depression is defined as a 10% decline in economic activity. If we haven't had that already, we will have it by the end of this quarter. 10% decline in GDP from the peak. Obviously, some people are affected more than others. This analysis comes from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. So I won't go through all of this, but their analysis encompassed 144.7 million employees. And if you look at the second bolded row here, employed in occupation at high risk of layoff, 67 million roughly, I'm rounding. That's equivalent to 46% of total employment. So 46% of Americans are at high risk of unemployment, 46%. So that includes folks in food preparation, that's the folks in the restaurants, that includes folks in sales, that's the retail sales. I mean, we've seen J. Crew and Neiman Marcus already declare bankruptcy during the crisis. You're going to see actually a lot of retail bankruptcies, by the way, large retail bankruptcies. So Anirban, we've seen J. Crew and Neiman Marcus. Is that the end of it? Not at all. Because ironically, because the economy is shut down, a lot of companies can't file bankruptcy as retailers. Why? Because one of the things you need to do when you file for bankruptcy is liquidate your inventory. That cash flow that you get from liquidating inventory is actually very valuable. But if I can't open my stores, I can't liquidate inventory, which makes bankruptcy filings difficult. So ironically, once the economy opens up in earnest, you're actually going to see more bankruptcy filings from retailers. I'm not talking about small businesses, by the way. I'm talking about the big businesses. But in any case, that's the situation. So because the data, some of the monthly data and quarterly data have been lagged, we've been looking as a group of people, economists, non-economists alike, at high frequency data, like initial unemployment claims for initial unemployment insurance claims, which I'm graphing for you here. So during the week ending May 2nd, there were 3.2 million Americans who filed for unemployment insurance. And you say, well, that's good news. That's less than the previous week. Yeah, I suppose that's right. But it's devastating nonetheless. I mean, we only had 5.8 million people unemployed in total pre-crisis. So for 3.2 million Americans to file for unemployment insurance in 1 week, and for that to be lower than the previous week, and for there to be a week during which more than 6.8 million Americans filed, as I say, 33.5 million Americans filed for unemployment insurance over a recent 7-week period. And the unemployment rate nationally is probably around 20%. And it's conceivable that somebody could lose a job, file successfully for unemployment insurance, and then get a job the next day. That is conceivable. I'm not saying that happens a lot, but it is conceivable. And so what might matter more are continuing claims, people currently on unemployment insurance, on right now. Now, unfortunately, these data only go through April 25th. We'll actually get some more data tomorrow morning. Please be looking out for that. But you can see what the trajectory is in terms of the number of people in aggregate who are on unemployment insurance. So that's where we're at right now. And the goal here is what? To get back to the status quo ex ante as quickly as possible. And let's talk about that. Let's end this on a positive note, shall we? And thank you for your indulgence. And then I'll go to Q&A with Zach. So what is this recovery going to look like? And there's been a lot of debate about whether or not it would be an L-shaped recovery, a check mark, a Nike swoosh, square root, U, V, W. I tell you what, you're going to hear a lot of economists who are going to say otherwise. I think it's going to be a V. Now, it's going to be an awkward V. It's going to be a V in which the downward segment of the V is lengthier than the upward segment. But what I'm trying to suggest to you is that the initial stages of expansion, the initial stages of recovery are going to be very brisk. They're going to feel so good. So this chart, this comes from Oxford Economics. Too many lines on here by half, but let me walk you through this. This probably doesn't make for great television, by the way, but that's just life. I'm an economist, not an actor. So too many lines on here by half, but let me go through this. This blue line here, so this comes from Oxford Economics, and Oxford Economics, I think, does an incredible job forecasting the economy, globally, nationally, so on and so forth. So that's why I chose to use their forecasts to just give you a sense of why I think that it's going to be V-shaped and why I'm not alone. So the blue line there represents the January forecast. So that's pre-COVID-19. That's where the global economy was headed. It was going to trend higher. It trend higher in terms of production, right? Now, the yellow line there, again, too many lines on here by half, but that's the current forecast baseline. So we have had COVID-19. And what this suggests is that the episode globally lasts for 2 quarters. And during that 2-quarter period, the global GDP or global output falls by 7%. And you see that negative 7% there. Okay. But the red line says that, okay, well, maybe we're wrong. Maybe this is more like a 3-quarter episode. And there is all this concern about resurgence in the fall. So it is eminently plausible that this goes on for 3 quarters. Again, we're in this for 2 months now. So 3 quarters is 9 months. And so if that happens over that 3-quarter period, the economy would shrink 13% globally, and that's at negative 13%. But you look at these lines carefully, ladies and gentlemen. If you look at the yellow line and the red line, what do you see there? Peer closely at it. You see the letter V for victory. They predict it's going to be a V-shaped recovery, and I think they're right. Why do I think they're right? Because that's what it has been when we've had previous pandemics. Now, these data come from Goldman Sachs. Again, too much data on here by half, but if you can pick out a blue-colored line on this chart that goes way up to the top and back down, that characterizes Hong Kong's economy 2003 during their SARS epidemic. So that 0% line that goes across that skinny black line, that's the average rate of pre-existing growth for these societies, average rate of growth. So early in the crisis, during that early phases of the pandemic or epidemic, growth falls below average. Of course it does. And if you follow that blue-colored line there, that Hong Kong line, things then get worse as more and more segments of the economy are affected by shutdowns, travel, tourism, whatever it happens to be. But then what do you see? You see a sharp bounce back in activity. You see a lot of V's on this chart. That's the way it has been. Now, if you measure this in the form of weeks, it's not going to be a very pointy V because we're going to open up the economy in stages. But if you look at this from the perspective of months and quarters, it's going to be a V. It's going to feel great. And one of the reasons I think it's going to be a V is that there's so much stimulus in the pipeline. Already 4 rounds of stimulus. A lot of people are waiting for their checks, whether small businesses that have applied for loans, some of which may be forgivable. There's talk right now, as I said, about a $3 trillion stimulus package coming out of Washington, D.C. A lot of help for state and local governments. I think that's pointing in the right direction. Oh, reasonable adults can agree to disagree on these things, right? How much is too much? But we know this, we're in crisis right now, and 1 in 5 Marylanders has filed for unemployment insurance, 1 in 5 of us. So I won't go through all of this, but the biggest was phase 3 so far. That was the CARES Act, a more than $2 trillion package. Then we got another phase 4, putting more money into the Paycheck Protection Program, which of course benefits small businesses, and the Healthcare Enhancement Act. And more stimulus is coming. And as this money hits the economy and as the economy is opening up, that's going to push us higher faster. So that brings me to my final slide, the 1 forecast. I've done the 9, I've done the 7, I've done the 3 in accordance with the ring verse, and now the 1. Look, I'll say the most obvious thing that economists can say. Recession has already begun globally in the United States, obviously. But I suspect this episode to be short and vicious, which is how my wife characterizes me. Why? We talked about it. I mean, the cure, unfortunately, doesn't come from the federal government or the Federal Reserve. It comes from, hopefully, Regeneron, Gilead Sciences, Pfizer, Merck, Sanofi, Aventis, Moderna, whomever it is. Already 100 clinical trials out there looking at vaccines and therapies for this thing. We know that remdesivir, which is a Gilead Sciences drug, has some efficacy. That's good news. People work with plasma and so antibodies and so on and so forth, various technologies. I mean, the smartest people in the world, or some of them, working on this issue. So yes, we might have a resurgence of this in the fall, but we're going to have a much better medical toolkit to deal with it. The best positioned people work in the public sector. They enjoy greater job stability. The private sector workforce is being hammered by local. Because we want as many of those Carroll County businesses to come back to Main Street, come back to the malls, come back to the strip centers as is possible. We want to get as close to that status quo ex ante. We don't want to have any great businesses die unnecessarily. And that means you need to shop locally in Carroll County. You saw that video at the beginning of this episode. Carroll County is a phenomenal place. I live in Baltimore County. As I was watching that video, I said, why do I not live in Carroll County? Why do I not have my business in Carroll County? Well, I have a lease. I have a mortgage. But in any case, unemployment has reached 14.7%. But as I told you earlier, it's probably more like 20% based on a statistical issue in that previous survey. Our collective expectations as economists are still adjusted to the downside because we're looking at these states struggling to reopen. We're hearing from universities saying, we don't think we're going to open up in the fall. I'm seeing, my older daughter goes to college in Philadelphia, and her friends are starting to think about canceling their leases that begin July 1st because they don't think University of Pennsylvania is going to be open, for in-person instruction. So, we'll see. My goodness. I want to see baseball. And the Ravens are awesome. I want to see the Ravens. And let me tell you this. When it commences, whether it's in the third quarter or the fourth quarter, because it's going to be one of the two, when it commences, recovery from this crisis will be sharp, profound, and most welcome. Look, people, as they get back to work, will find low interest rates. They're going to find low gasoline prices, right? Pent-up demand is high for various products because they haven't been shopping for furniture, automobiles, so on and so forth. There's going to be a need to rebuild inventories because when General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, BMW, others shutter their plants, to the extent that autos are still being sold, vehicles are still being sold, inventory can only come down. At some point, we're going to come out of our homes, go to the dealerships, look for that C8 Corvette, which is a delicious vehicle, and say, where is it? And the dealership is going to call the manufacturer, send me cars, and we're going to rebuild inventory. And people, of course, are anxious to meet again. We want to get back to the way. I want to be able to shake your hand. I don't want to just, wave at you from 6 feet with my mask on. We want to go to restaurants. I'm tired of eating canned food. I mean, love you, Progresso, but my goodness. See a movie with some people other than my family members and watch the Baltimore Orioles, which is the most beautiful thing a human being can do short of nurturing a child, and engage in other most wonderful of human activities. I'm looking forward to 2021. I know you probably are too. And with that, Mike, Zach, I'll give it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Anirban. That was excellent as always. And I'm not just saying that because I work for you.
Right.
Give me 1 second and we will get Q&A going here. Okay. So first question, and you touched on this a little bit, but as the recovery begins, do you fear that inflation will become a problem?
Right. I do not fear inflation as the recovery begins. No, not at all, because there are lots of deflationary pressures. Remember, we're in this together with the rest of the world. So demand around the world has collapsed. And so take oil prices as an example. Oil today is trading around $25 a barrel. Prices collapse. Why? Because demand has collapsed. And whether the Saudis or the Russians or others try to cut back supply, price is still low. But once this economy starts to rebuild its momentum, and it's going to feel fantastic, we've created so much money supply. And basic economics says that when you create this kind of money supply, when your central bank pushes this much liquidity into the system, at some point you will have inflation. It's speculative. Is it 2022? Is it 2023? Is it sometime thereafter? Not clear. But I was actually thinking about it, believe it or not, this morning, this exact same issue. There's a particular equation that relates money supply to inflation in economics. And if you look at that equation, it becomes pretty clear we're going to have some inflation at some point in the future. And here's the thing. Here's the awful thing about it. We might have inflation at some point in the future without having a lot of economic growth. Because once all this stimulus works through the economy, it is possible that we have a double-dip recession. So this V that I've been talking about could turn into a W. Something to think about. But again, that's speculative. These are early days.
Great. Okay, next question. This is a good one. Hotels are struggling in Carroll County and really everywhere in the world. Is there a light at the end of the tunnel, and is that light a train?
Right. There is light at the end of the tunnel, and it is, but it's an Amtrak train, and so it's not going anywhere. No, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and it'll be quite bright. We're going to come out of this better than most nations. And Carroll County is, I'm not just saying this to pander to the audience. Carroll County really is a phenomenal entrepreneurial place. It's a great place to raise a family. It's a great place to have a business. It's a great place to educate a child. And that hasn't changed, not one lick. So it's a great place to visit. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. I would say that, among the segments that will be slowest to recover are commercial real estate and the lodging sector, as it turns out, because one of the things that happened pre-crisis is we built a ton of new hotel rooms as a country. There's a lot of competition for visitors, across the region, across the country. So that's going to take some time to get occupancy rates back up to levels that are satisfying to property owners, hotel managers. But yeah, there's light at the end of the tunnel. As I said, this is going to be a V-shaped recovery. The early stages is going to be quite rapid. And then, we're going to have a presidential election in November. We'll see who is president. We're going to have new ideas, fresh ideas from new Congress people, new senators, so on and so forth. And we'll see where this economy goes.
Great. Okay, we've gotten a lot of questions about federal debt. I know you touched on it. I think to sum up all these questions, and I really am talking, close to 10 so far, how do we get out of it? Is there a plan? Do we try? And how do we reverse the trend of taking on more debt?
Yeah, Zach, this is a great question. I worry about this. And I worry about this because I'm a Marylander. And we in Maryland have not done, in my view, people can disagree, a great job diversifying our economy away from federal activities, whether federal government agency spending or federal government contracting. And so when the federal government begins dealing with its deficit demons, it's going to be a problem. Now, it's not a crisis until the bond market says it's a crisis. And right now, the bond market is willing to lend, as I'm speaking to you right now, to the federal government for 10 years at an annual interest rate of 0.665%, less than 0.7%. Okay? There are not that many people willing to lend to you and me for less than 0.7%, but people are willing to lend trillions of dollars to the federal government of the United States at 0.665% interest. Okay? It's not a crisis until the bond market says so, but pre-crisis, we expected Medicare to become insolvent by 2026. And at some point, this federal government is going to have to move closer to a balanced budget. It can't run deficits that are $1 trillion or 5% of GDP. It doesn't have to pay back all the debt because over time, inflation will wear down that debt. And by over time, I mean 30, 50, 70, 100 years. But it cannot be running these kinds of deficits. And so at some point after this crisis, the federal government's going to have to behave like adults, meaning like the rest of us, and balance budgets, or move closer to that at least. Otherwise, there's going to be a massive crisis in this country, and I don't know when it's going to be, but 2026 is a good guess.
Great. Okay, this is another combo question for you, Anirban. We've gotten a lot of questions about construction, so I want you to hit it from the commercial side, then residential, and also touch on home prices if you can, and then, touch on some related industries like architecture and engineering. Sorry to give you a loaded question there.
Right, so let's go through all of this. So let's talk about the residential side first. I think that's going to be one of the stronger parts of the economy. Again, interest rates are low, and look what's happened here from the perspective of our society. All of a sudden, there are a lot of people out there who want to be close to one another, right? They moved into large apartment buildings with elevators, smaller units, paying a ton of rent, often in very urbanized settings, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia, wherever it happens to be. And now what are they saying? Well, so first of all, a lot of them are now moving from their 20s into their 30s. So even without COVID-19, they would be looking more towards suburban or even semi-rural living. And so even before this, there's going to be a lot of demand for housing or homes in Carroll County as younger families moved into that market. We've already seen that, by the way. The first-time homebuyer market has been quite active in Carroll County. The issue there has been there's not a lot of homes that are priced at a level that is affordable to the first-time buyer. But so there's that. But now with this social distancing requirement that many people feel, they need to be able to get away, not be trapped if this were to happen again. That's going to cause people to look for even less dense environments in which to live. I've been saying a lot to folks, I think one of the big winners is Maryland's Eastern Shore. Because think about it. If you're a New Yorker, and this happens again, and you're stuck in the Upper West Side of Manhattan or wherever, which is not a bad place to be stuck, by the way, but if you need to get away, but you can't get on an airplane to go to a place in Florida, you'd need to get into a vehicle. The Eastern Shore is 3.5 hours away of Maryland. You can socially distance, you can be in a beautiful place, you can have access to water, all those kinds of things. So, and I think the same thing is true in the Baltimore metropolitan area. I think this is really bad for Baltimore City, because this is another reason for people not to live in Baltimore City, this need to social distance or perceived need. So, but that also pushes more people into the Carroll counties, Baltimore counties, Howard counties of the world. So there's that. And we don't have much inventory of unsold homes. So I think home values stay pretty flat. Commercial real estate will be among the most devastated segments of the economy and one of the last to recover. Because coming out of this crisis, you're going to see a lot of empty storefronts and a lot of empty office suites. And a lot of us have realized, myself included, that our staffs can work remotely, right? I haven't seen you for weeks, Zach. I mean, I've seen you on camera, but I haven't been in your physical presence for weeks. We're still working together. About a third of Americans can work remotely. And, there had been this big push into Class A plus space during the boom. Why? Not to save on rent, because Class A plus space, costs more, but because when the problem is finding good workers, and if I'm a professional services business, I've got to find the best attorneys, best architects, best engineers, so on and so forth. I've got to recruit. I want to have beautiful office space. So when they come in to visit me during the interview, they say, this is success address. I want to be here. So there's a big move out of Class B space and Class A space, even though Class A space is much more expensive. Guess what? With this crisis, people are going to say, why am I paying so much for rent? Why do I have so much square footage? They're going to vacate a lot of that Class A space. They might go back to Class B space because there's lots of workers now available. And that's bad, for commercial real estate. And it's going to take a long time. Hotels, same thing. It's going to take a long time. I mentioned that earlier, to get back to those levels of occupancy. And so what does this mean? I think it's actually a good time for engineers. Why? Because engineers have to retrofit a lot of buildings. There's all kinds of air handling systems in buildings. We talked about this, you and I, yesterday. Lots of air handling systems that have mechanical systems that have to be upgraded, because the COVID-19 virus, it can spread through those systems. So you're going to see a lot of upgrade on those systems. That's good for engineers. But architects often work on new construction projects. And this, the future for them is not looking very bright, because demand for new construction is going to be way down for quite some time.
Okay, this next question is one I know you like to address. So just going to read it as it came in. Do you feel that there will be excess inventory of second homes in the next year as people try to conserve cash and lessen their debt?
Good question. So yeah, I would think that there'd be some impact on demand for second homes, but not significant, because yes, while people have less cash and less confidence, and therefore don't want to take on as much debt, we would expect that you've got a lot of people out of Chicago, New York, Detroit, Baltimore, Philadelphia, who are saying, I need to buy a second home. I need to be able to get away. Now, one of the big winners there is Florida. You look at the Florida real estate market right now, there are people pouring over condos. Okay, I mean, they're looking for condominiums in Florida right now. That market has stayed pretty hot. I was talking to realtors out of Anne Arundel County last week. We had a webinar with them. And a lot of those realtors said, we put a home on the market. One realtor said, we put a home on the market in Severna Park. We got 17 bids the first day. So now that wasn't a second home, as it turns out. But the point is, I think the second home market will actually hold up reasonably well. Because again, we've built a lot of second homes, not for people to actually live in, but to rent out. So for that part of the market that's focused on rentals and Airbnb, oh yeah, that market's going to be terrible. But for the market for condominiums, as second homes, actual second homes where people go there to stay, they don't just rent it out, I think that market stays actually pretty strong.
Great. Okay, this next one's another combo question. I'm going to give you a lot. I'm sure you'll have some good answers. So broadly, what is your forecast for the impact on higher education, both public and private colleges? Do you have any forecasts regarding, what schools are doing come fall? I know that one's a little trickier. And then finally, with women being disproportionately affected by unemployment, if schools are not regularly enrolled come fall, do you think that affects a third or fourth quarter recovery?
Right, a lot of questions there. I mean, the timing of when schools open up is not clear, but we're hearing it from a lot of university presidents that they think that they might have to engage students remotely during the next semester. So we lose the fall semester of 2020. I mean, I'm hearing that. Now you have thousands of universities and colleges across this country. So different presidents, different groups of trustees think differently about this. But it seems to me that a lot of universities are not going to open up on time in September. So there's that. Now, with respect to the longer term issue, and ultimately that matters more, I think the big losers here, and they've struggled in general, are smaller liberal arts colleges that charge a lot of tuition, especially those that don't have massive reputational footprints. I'm not talking about the Williams colleges or Colby colleges. They're going to have no issues whatsoever. But more regional, small colleges could be an issue, because I think the market share winners here are state universities, in particular for in-state tuition, and two-year colleges. I think two-year colleges are going to grab greater market share because of this. A lot of students are going to say, if I can't live on the campus, why would I go there to begin with? I'm just going to stay at home for 2 years, go to a two-year college, and then if I want to get my four-year degree, I'll go from there. So in the short term, I think two-year colleges and state universities, given the financial crunch that many families are under, and also remember there was this pre-existing narrative regarding student debt and whether or not it makes so much sense to take out so much student debt. I think a lot of families included it doesn't. So if there were some questions about people attending four-year private colleges before, those questions are even more intense now. And that, I think, takes people to public college. But believe me, I still think young people want to get away from their families, ultimately, right? I mean, they don't want to live with mom and dad forever. And it's supposed to be the best 4 years of your life, in part because you're not with your parents, you're with people of your age, and you're playing a lot of beer pong. And you can't do that at home. So I'm not saying that the four-year institutional setting is gone. I'm just saying from a market share perspective, public universities are the winner, two-year colleges are the winner. Great.
Okay, this next one's a really interesting question, I think. It just came in. Many people are saying that, the child care industry needs to get restarted before other things can, because, workers are dependent on childcare. Is there another industry out there that, is kind of a linchpin to restarting the economy that is not being talked about?
Oh, sure. Mass transit. Right. So when are we going to start up bus schedules and, to really get people to work, because a lot of the jobs in any metropolitan area are in the core of the metropolitan area. Baltimore City is losing population. It's lost jobs. It's lost a lot. It's a diminished city. Unfortunately, I love Baltimore. But you'll still find more jobs in Baltimore City than, let's say, in Westminster or Sykesville or even Towson, right? So, so we need to get, mass transit going. That's not, and that's an issue, right? Because New York City became an epicenter in large measure because they kept their subways open probably too long. So how do you reopen that? And how much money has to be spent, cleaning these, rail cars and so on and so forth each night and so on and so forth. Who does that work, and who pays for that? So yeah, it's daycare centers, it's mass transit, it's all kinds of things we're not talking about. What about the airlines? I mean, business is done cross country and around the world. So, the transportation system, generally speaking, beyond mass transit, that has to come back to life before we really can have a full-fledged economic expansion. And it's not easy to do when we're worried about a fall resurgence in the virus.
Okay, we did get, this is a comment, not a question, but someone from Carroll County who just sold their house with multiple offers, so that, confirms what you said about the residential market. Now, this is another one that we've gotten lots of questions about. This is probably our last combo question of the day. Can you speak to the entertainment, food, and beverage industry and how you see them recovering as, probably one of the more problematic industries at this moment?
Certainly is at this moment, because it requires physical presence to consume the service, right? So entertainment, restaurants, so on and so forth. I think restaurants, look, I think a lot of restaurants actually come back pretty quickly. And here's why I say that. It's because restaurants are a treasured feature of any community. Your local restaurant's a treasured feature of your quality of life. And I think that a lot of us are aware that our restaurants are suffering right now. Yeah, some of them are doing, pickup, and some of them are, working with Grubhub or DoorDash and doing home delivery, but we know they're suffering and we want them to survive. We care about our restaurant entrepreneurs. I think that comes back pretty quickly. And by the way, as I say, we're tired of eating Progresso soup, nothing, or even Campbell's. So there's that. But movie theaters, big problem here. Because so many people during the crisis have upgraded their television, got their Netflix, got their Amazon Prime, so on and so forth. And we invested a lot in movie theaters during this boom, in part because that was a way to compete with Amazon. So Amazon can't give you an experience. They can give you merchandise, they can give you inventory to choose from, they can, but they can't give you the experience that you get at a mall. And if you put a movie theater next to the mall, you go to the movie, you shop at Abercrombie and Fitch or wherever you shop, and then you go home and everyone's happy. But movie theaters now, given that people have these big screen televisions at home, because they're quite affordable, aren't they, relative to historic norms, and their Netflix accounts, so on and so forth. A lot of reasons to think that movie theaters are not going to recover anytime soon, and gymnasiums. Because one of the things a lot of people have done, I'm sure this is true in Carroll County where people look so fit, they bought their Peloton bikes. And that's their gym. And they weren't really using their gym membership. They got it because they have to get it and they have to go show their friend that they have a card. But they weren't really going. They went the first 2 months constantly. They were a sweaty mess. But then it just tailed off for some reason. And so now they've got that gym at home. And so those are a couple of parts of real estate, movie theaters and gymnasiums, exercise facilities that won't come back rapidly.
Great. So I think we have time for one or maybe two more questions. We'll see. But this is a tough one. I'll preface this by saying we don't know where does have gigabit internet and doesn't. But how do you think that rural areas internet speed will affect the communities that win and lose in this recovery?
No question. I mean, that's a big issue, right? We have this digital divide still. We talked about this in the 1990s. We still have it in many rural areas. And I think this is, a big issue on the Eastern Shore, for instance, parts of the Western Shore as well, that, when you're working from home and if you're running a small business and you're doing it remotely, I'm with you right now on the Zoom meeting. We're conducting business here, and I better have a good internet connection, to deal with this Zoom technology, so on and so forth, and to be with you in this interface. So if I didn't have this, because my home is in a rural area, I'm disadvantaged from a business perspective. So who are the winners here? People with faster broadband speeds. Who are the losers? People with slower speeds. Where do we find the fastest broadband speeds? Often in urbanized areas or metropolitan areas. So yeah, that's a problem. So this is a social issue. And the hope would be, therefore, that there will be more support for rural communities to bring broadband, real legitimate broadband service to them. Reliable broadband service. We have to do that. It's time. This is a public issue, and it's a public issue that the private sector hasn't yet solved.
Great. Okay. We'll do one more quick question, and this piggybacks onto the entertainment question. This viewer asks, how about entertainment that involves gatherings like events and parties? And, I think a lot of this is, think the gig economy surrounding weddings and all those, smaller vendors. How do you see them recovering? And is it just delayed, or is there long-term damage there?
No, I think it's delayed. I mean, it could be some long-term damage there, but look, Uber and Lyft were very valuable services coming into this crisis. It's the way people get around, including many older folks who, no longer drive. And so I think that's coming back. And by the way, we're going to gather together again the way we once did. And because no one is going to take the NFL away from me. No one is going to take the Baltimore Ravens away from me. And I think ultimately it's the tail wagging the dog. Right now, the issue is public health. Public health is driving all our considerations. But you can see the debate is changing. All of a sudden, we're focusing more on the economy and when to open up and so on and so forth. And I tell you, when the NFL season gets ready to start and they announce that it's postponed, that's when you'll see, blood in the streets. We want our football. And so I think you're going to see a lot of tension in our society. You're going to see a lot of tension between Anthony Fauci and the president. That's my guess. I don't see it. But these are major issues. They're difficult issues to deal with. And we're going to get together again. It's delayed, but it's going to happen.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Anirban. That really was excellent. I'd like to again thank everyone who joined us and stuck with us through the end. I'd also like to thank, Exploration Commons and the Community Media Center for making this possible. We really appreciate it. And with that, I'll turn things over to Mike for some closing remarks. Mike?
Zach, thanks a lot for being the host of this. And Anirban, it's always great to have you, especially now I have one more reason to love you with the whole Lord of the Rings thing. I'm a real geek with that. I love that whole storyline. So I'm just wondering, are you Gandalf or would you be Frodo? But we'll talk about that later. But thank you. And our sponsor
Lord
said,
Elrond. But anyway, go ahead.
That sounds good, from like Rivendell. But thank you again to our sponsors. You guys are amazing. Do want to encourage you once again, keep your money local whenever you can. We've got over 620 folks on our member directory on our website, carrollcountychamber.org. And we've also got we've got a link to all of the restaurants who are members of ours who are still open. So please, spend your money here as much as you can. I honestly believe we need to use some common sense now here in Maryland and let some of the small mom and pop stores open up. If Walmart can do it with masks and keeping folks apart, I think these folks can too. So I'd love to see that happen. Any influence you've got would be great with Hogan. So I would appreciate that. Other than that, you guys all have a great day. Find some nice local restaurant. Be kind, stay safe, shop local. We're absolutely all in this together. So thank you for being with us today. Bye-bye.
Thank you.